The Dina August 𝗃𝗀𝗀𝗀 Cardiff Brehon. I'm delighted to be joined by Jacob Duerksen. He's going to talk to us about a project that he's been working on called the Heroes of Tara. This is going to be very interesting for anybody who likes role-playing games because it's a rule set that's based on the ancient Irish mythology and heroes. But he's here, so I'm gonna just like let him take the lead on this. So, Jacob, if you could maybe introduce yourself and a little bit about the Heroes of Tara that you've put together.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jacob Duerksen. Thank you very much to Kevin for letting me come onto his channel and just talk to you all about this fantastic project I've been involved with, or really been running on my own. Heroes of Tara is a third-party adaptation of the 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons rules, as permitted through the OGL, or Creative Commons license now, actually. Anybody who is aware of recent news in Dungeons and Dragons, particularly 5th edition news, will know about what's referred to as the OGL scandal. Maybe we can get into that a bit later if you're curious, but for now, it was something that rocked the entire publishing community, but we got through it. Heroes of Tara, after a long production period, has finally been released. The PDF has been available on drivethrurpg.com since about October, and hardcover printed copies are coming out available in just the next few days. It is an adaptation, or rather a simulation of basically any piece of Irish mythology and folklore that I could bring together in a cohesive and immersive high fantasy setting. It's essentially the setting is the island of Ireland, anywhere from, say, the 1st century BC to the 2nd century, 3rd century AD. But it's a high fantasy mythologized version of ancient Ireland, still very much grounded in actual history, archaeology, and folklore, but not taken with any great liberties. It's all just, as I say, a faithful simulation. And I'm just excited to be bringing Irish mythology to life and bringing it to a new audience. Irish mythology is one of those things that a lot of people, just about everybody, know a little something about, and everybody's very curious to learn more. But it's actually seems to be a bit of a hard topic for a lot of people to break into. And so one of the big ideas with Heroes of Tara is to provide people a cohesive and immersive stepping stone into this whole world. And I honestly, more than getting people to play the game, I hope it gets people to start their own journey of discovery with this fantastic mythology that we have.
That's great. Thanks for that explanation. So, my first question, or my next question, then, is to ask you. Obviously, you're not from Ireland, so I wanted to ask you what inspired you to pick Irish mythology and adapt it for these rules. Now, I've actually read the book myself, but I've had a skim through it because it has like 400 pages. You've done quite extensive work into it. So I was just curious, like, why did you pick Irish mythology? And yeah, how did you approach this project?
Well, yes, so I am an American citizen with no particular Irish heritage, perhaps a small percentage somewhere in there, like many Americans. Uh, but I would say that, rather than me finding the mythology or choosing the mythology, the old adage, or you might say it just, it found me. It chose me in a way. I do mention it in the preface of the book a little bit, where I'd say my backstory in all of this is around the age of 9. For one Christmas, my parents gifted me 2 albums. One was The Chieftains 7 by The Chieftains, fantastic traditional session group that I would recommend to anybody. Second album was If I Should Fall from Grace with God by the Pogues. And these 2 albums were my introduction to Irish music. And just as music is a gateway to many things for many people, it is what led me to interact with the culture of Ireland as a whole. Uh, Generally, just in my overall interests and temperaments, I've always been fascinated by any piece of culture or folklore that I could find. You know, cultures all around the world fascinate me. But just something in particular about Irish culture, history, music, it just resonated with me in a way that I've never really been able to explain, but it just kind of led into a growing obsession. And, you know, over time, I became aware of Irish mythology. And, you know, as I said, it's not really an easy topic to break into, especially for us Americans. You know, it's all, if you're interested in mythology, it's usually Hellenistic mythology, you know, Greco-Roman or Norse mythology, Odin and Thor and whatnot. But I gradually, you know, got more familiar with Irish mythology over time. I became aware of just how fascinating it was, and I was just, you know, I never really knew why it wasn't really as well known as it should be, perhaps. And then, you know, fast forward to the COVID shutdowns. Everybody's looking for a way to kill time. My way of killing time was I just started writing this book. By that time I've been a Dungeons and Dragons player with a group of my friends here at home for well over 10 years. It was something that we would get together and do just about every week. And at first, my only real thought was to just make something for, you know, the group, have something to bring to the table just for us to play privately. But then, you know, the COVID shutdowns carried on and my writing carried on. And before I knew it, I had something on my hands. And from there, I just took it to social media in a very clumsy way. I have no personal social media active myself. I am not very, you know, adept at navigating social media. So I just started with posts on Facebook groups and Reddit pages until eventually a promotional manager, you know, a fellow named Daniel, who I'll always be grateful to, he found my posts. He approached me and offered a deal where he would just, you know, help me analyze the data, get advertisements to the right spot. And before we knew it, we were off to the races with a Kickstarter campaign that was quite successful, and for which I am still, I don't know if I've, you know, can still believe it, but I'm incredibly grateful. And the production of the book was funded. It's for sale now on DriveThruRPG, and here we are.
So, Jake, can you talk a little bit about how your background in archaeology has informed this process?
I'd say it hasn't really directly informed the process, as Irish mythology doesn't have much to do with my day-to-day work life. My work is primarily focused in the northeastern United States, where we're dealing with, you know, post-colonial, pre-colonial, prehistoric remains and artifacts, which is incredibly fascinating in its own right. North American archaeology is a world away from European archaeology. Far more lithics than metallurgical remains, for one thing. But no, I'd say the best way that my archaeological education has informed this book was simply through the tools that going to college gave me for critical thinking, investigating sources, finding sources.
And what did you study in college?
I was
a
a college university. I don't understand the distinction myself. But I double majored in history and anthropology. My particular campus actually did not offer any archaeological programs until a minor came in during my senior year. Unfortunately, I went to a business and engineering school, so did the best I could with what I had.
Yeah, but I'm sure that like the sort of things that you study were helpful in approaching a project like Heroes of Tara. Just like the research methods, how do you test for veracity and authenticity and that sort of thing?
Yeah, just investigating the sources. I would say honestly, the history education part of my education probably helped more than the archaeological. As you know, archaeology is primarily focused with the material remains. You know, investigating the lithics, identifying what you pull out of the ground. The history education is where they teach you how to interact with the records, the sources, how to interrogate reports. As you know, you learn the difference between primary and secondary sources, etc. And just naturally when you're writing a book, one is going to come through more than the other.
Okay, that's great. And so let's talk a little bit more about the Kickstarter campaign that you did. And for anybody who's been following my page for a few years, you might remember I promoted this Kickstarter campaign in a video called, I think it was the arrival of the 𝗃𝗃 which I thought would be a great topic to sync up, just because of what you cover in your book. So what was that experience like? Had you used Kickstarter before? You mentioned that you were quite surprised because you managed to fund the whole book. So could you talk a little bit about the Kickstarter campaign?
It was a whirlwind, and it was the first time I had ever tried anything like that. Excuse me. As I had told you in the backstory there, it was just something that kind of eventually sprang out of nowhere, just organically. And no, it had been my first Kickstarter campaign ever. It was my first time trying to sell anything to anybody ever. But, with the assistance of wonderful people who knew their way through the landscape far better than I did, and just through the amazing enthusiasm and graciousness and generosity of over 1,000 backers, it somehow worked out. I'm sure that if we tried with a second book, we could probably replicate the success again. But I'm still learning how it's all done. That's one thing, is this has been a whole process of learning by doing. A lot of hard lessons have been learned. The process, it took a while. You made reference to that video that in which you mentioned Here's a Tara, and for which I'm still grateful. But it was quite a while back, wasn't it?
It was,
about
yeah.
4 or 5 years now.
Yeah.
So the Kickstarter campaign did run about 4 years ago, 3 years going on 4, and the entire time since then has been spent in the production of the book. And I would say, if I were to do it all over again, I would do things. I would do quite a bit differently. I would certainly have a far more prepared and finished product before I took it to Kickstarter, because, well, you see, when I had it to Kickstarter, I thought that it was already near finished. I thought it would maybe only take about another year of polishing to have it ready. But the way these things go, they always just go out of your control, especially when you. Especially just for myself, I just let it grab me by the nose and pull me where it took me. So that's why it's taken so long, but it's now well worth it.
Yeah, well, we haven't looked at the book itself. There's quite a lot in it, so I would like give yourself a pat on the back, because I was reading through it there during the week, and I was like, this is pretty impressive. It's not only are you after capturing Irish mythology in its kind of raw essence, you had to think about, how do I adapt this to a Dungeons and Dragons sort of framework? And that's an added layer of complexity on top of it, So don't be so hard on yourself. And I think it's really impressive what you have done here. And maybe we'll have a look in the book in a few moments. But I wanted to ask you, was there any particular aspect of Irish mythology that you specifically wanted to adapt for the Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition setting?
More than any particular piece, I'd say the idea was trying to bring it all together into a complete and holistic picture. The entire tapestry of Irish mythology in the grand scale was kind of the object. And I cast such a wide net that you'll even find little pieces of inspiration tossed in there that are not necessarily from any of the 4 cycles, but they're just maybe an odd piece of folklore here and there, whether ancient or even more modern. Ancient Greco-Roman classical sources are thrown in. I basically tossed in just about everything I could, including the kitchen sink.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes across like that. I'm just looking through the contents here. You go right back into the dawn of history, the pre-Christian mythology, and you've explained that in a really clever way. There's different small sections for the island of the setting sun, children of Danu, the coming of the Milesians, the reign of Lu. It's like you've almost written a book of mythology there, you know, like that's a comprehensive guide to the Irish mythology. But then you bring in social structure, governing principles, cultural characteristics. You have major tribes, you have the 𝗵𝗄, you have the Firbolg, you have the Gaels, you have outlander tribes like Britain and Gaul and Picts and Romans. And, you know, as I was reading through it, I was like, wow, this guy has really done a lot of work here. You know what I mean? I was really super impressed by what you had put together. You even have 𝗼𝗄𝗆 in there. You have like feats and honorific titles. You have new skills, and you have special social encounters. Maybe we could spend a bit of time talking about that, because what jumped out to me in special social encounters was Brehon Judgments. You also have 𝗺𝗺𝗺𝗀𝗀, which I think is champion's portion, right?
Yep. That's the boasting contest for the hindquarters of the boar.
Exactly. Bardic competitions, Brehon Judgments, I mentioned, druidic ceremonies, sports and games, and Troscud. And that made me, when I seen Troscud, I wanted to ask, had you completed any of the courses on Brehon Academy? Because some of the stuff that I'm reading here, I'm like, oh, that sounds a lot like
Well,
what I've covered myself, you know?
I can only say that I've been a longtime viewer of your channel, and you have indirectly been a great help in many aspects of this book. That's one part of a wonderful thing about just finding any source I can is there are so many brilliant minds such as yourself and many other channels right here on YouTube with fantastic information. And you all would provide the thread, and I would then follow it down the rabbit hole. I would locate a lot of the same sources. I would say, okay, where is Kevin of Brehon Law Academy getting his information? I need to track this down. And I believe there is even a particular video you once did on the subject of Troscud that I found highly informative.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah, it was a good few years ago, now that I think of it. But when I seen Troscud, I was like, wow, that was the link for me in my mind. I was like, he must have watched that Troscud video. So that's pretty cool. I'm glad that, you know, we're all doing our own thing, you know, but to hear that my work is having an influence on something like this is really it's a nice feeling, you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. And just the idea that there is this interconnected ecosystem of ideas at work, even without any of us being consciously moving it. It just happens organically. And this whole idea of interconnectedness goes all the way down through the sources, where even on the topic of Troscud, when you think about that long enough, you start to think about similar practices in India. You think about the Indo-European connection. You think about how this goes back throughout ancient times and different cultures.
Mm-hmm.
I was recently reading a portion of the opening of my book to my grandfather. His sight is too far gone to be reading himself, but I just had to share it with him. And the big thing that he came away with after I read him perhaps the first 11 pages was he was struck by the interconnectedness that I had pointed out between Irish mythology and this far broader tapestry of other mythologies and sources. My grandfather, for instance, had never known that Irish sources and scholarship was so intimately bound up with the classical sources and the clerical sources of monastic writing and whatnot. And it's just everywhere you look, there is this interconnectedness. There's just these intellectual threads that lead in every direction. And that's honestly why the book is so big.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's an enjoyable read. And I was wondering, did your grandfather pick up on the connections between Ireland and India? Because that's something that stood out to me. I've been in India twice, and I have also been aware of like the linguistic similarities between Sanskrit and Old Gaelic. And there's also you mentioned that the Irish myths could be in the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, and you also mentioned that Balor of the evil eye is connected to Shiva's evil eye, and I found that very fascinating. And I just wondered, like, is that the sort of thing that your grandfather picked up on when you were explaining this to him?
Well, my grandfather is not himself so versed in Vedic mythology, so he didn't really know that end of things to make the connection. But as you're remarking on, it is something that I point out in the opening of the book when I'm laying out this entire contextual framework, and it is something that I found quite remarkable, and I do remark on a few times throughout the book, even after the introduction. There, uh, it is just something you. That really quite strikes me, and I know that others remark upon it enough. It's the parallels between the Druidic class and the Brahmins. It is the fact that there is the theoretical goddess of Danu here in Indo-European mythology, back through the Dnieper and Danube and these rivers throughout Europe, leading back perhaps to this connection with the river. What is it? Asura, by the name of Danu. Just all of these connections, and this is before we even get into the actual Dungeons and Dragons rules for the game.
Exactly.
This is just the I even if nobody reads the even if nobody plays the game, I'd like to think that this book offers some. I was about to say that this book offers some education on the topic, but I almost wouldn't want to presume to claim to be an educational source, because I still also want to stress that I am just an enthusiast like everybody else. There are many brilliant minds engaged in this topic, and I don't want to claim any particular credentials. But if somebody learns anything from this book, I think it would be mission accomplished.
Well, I wouldn't be so humble if I was you, because I'm looking at the book and it's quite impressive. And you've also included where all this information comes from in the appendices. So don't be. I think this is a great historical, not historical resource, but it's a great academic resource, because everything that you say in this, you're backing it up with, like, here's an external reference, here's an external source, and that's found in the appendices. So I wouldn't be so humble if I was you, because I might actually use this as a reference guide in the future, simply because it covers everything. You have the social structure, you have the clans, the caste, the high kingship, you have honor, hospitality, veneration of knowledge, and on and on and on. So I don't know if I would be so quick to downplay the veracity of this what you've produced here. So yeah, just on that, you have some very interesting maps. You have, like, the more I looked at it, the more I was like, wow, this guy's after putting a lot of work into it. So how did you what am I trying to say? Did you find it challenging to adapt this amount of mythology to a D&D 5th edition framework? I noticed that you mentioned in it that this is a game, and so therefore it must be fun. So how did you balance that, like, historical information with the idea that it's still a game?
Well, primarily, yes, the principle that you're referring to that I point out in the book is that this is first and foremost a game that players are sitting at the table to have fun with. They're not there to visit a museum, even though visiting a museum is an amazing time. I recommend it to anybody. But this setting, as much as it is adored by many, cannot be treated too preciously when it is being used for entertainment purposes. And, as educational as I try to make it, I'm also honest about the fact that at the end of the day, it is a recreational project. And some compromises will have to be made, especially if you want to create a cohesive, immersive, fully realized fictional world in which the players can, like, imaginatively invest themselves. It has to have an internal logic to it, which we all know mythology does not always have an internal logic. There are often contradictions that pop up between two various stories, even if they're inside the same cycle. So that was one big aspect of adapting the source material, was cuts and compromises had to be made. For instance, the setting of ancient Ireland, or as it is referred to in the book by Old Irish Eriu, it is a bit of like a compressed timeline where both Cuchulainn and 𝗵𝗵𝗶𝘀 walk the earth at the same time within this fictional setting, even though we know that in the actual source materials, their stories were set several centuries apart. And this merging of timelines brings up certain questions, such as, well, who's the High King at the time? Is it 𝗁𝗵𝗆, who ruled during a period of the Ulster cycle, or is it perhaps 𝗁𝗵𝗆𝗃 from the Fenian cycle? In the case of Heroes of Tara, I went with 𝗁𝗵𝗆𝗃, as he was determined to be the more dynamic character of any of the High King candidates. But at the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean that 𝗁𝗵𝗆𝗃 or the other High Kings need to be left on the cutting room floor. They could still be left in the game setting as just mighty chieftains, still playing out the plots of their stories in such a way that players can interact with them, take part in those stories, perhaps alter the old stories through their involvement, or just have a satisfying time playing them through to the end, and being happy that their characters played a part in this story that's been around for centuries. So it's not just taking Irish mythology as inspiration to create this original Irish mythology light setting. It is a simulated representation of the world of Irish mythology. And it wasn't too difficult, actually. Another reason that this work just, took so long and ran away with me and grew beyond my expectations is that the source material kept providing in a way that I don't know if many other bodies of myth really could. I mean, obviously, Greek and Norse mythology have demonstrated the depth of their wells. They can be plumbed endlessly by entertainment media and still never hit the bottom. And it turns out Irish mythology is much the same way, where the further you go into the sources, the more you see things that just leap out at you as just like, oh, wow, this needs to be put in the game somehow. I need to have this in Heroes of Tara. And 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons was especially well suited to this, more than any other game system. Because, D&D is not the only game in town. There are other games by other publishers and companies out there, and other overall forms of game design, other schools of thought. For instance, Dungeons and Dragons is based on what you call a D20 class-based system, where the primary size of die that you're rolling is a D20, or a 20-sided dice. And the design of the characters is based on classes. Your character is a wizard, a fighter, a barbarian, a cleric, and they progress along these paths by advancing in level. Level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 barbarian. Whereas the other big form of game design is D100 or D20 skills based, where your character is not necessarily limited by identifying with any particular class. You just have a list of skills that you can choose to put points into as you please, and your point distribution for skills is what defines your character. Dungeons and Dragons class-based design is particularly well suited for, I believe, representing and displaying Irish mythology in a way that D100 or D20 skills-based would not be. Because when you are going through a rule book for a 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons game, any player's handbook, and you're going through the descriptions of the classes, these descriptions are telling you the new features and abilities that your character is unlocking with each new successive level that they have achieved. And these class feature descriptions go into quite a bit of detail. For instance, it just provided a way for me to show the details of the Warrior of the Red Branch, or the Fenid, or the Fili, which are the classes in Heroes of Tara. The classes of Heroes of Tara were all based on the template of the heroes of Irish mythology. Cuchulainn was the archetype for the warrior of the Red Branch player class. 𝗵𝗵𝗶𝘀 was the archetype for the Fenid player class. And yes, in the 𝗵𝗵𝗶𝘀, well, the 𝗵𝗵𝗶𝘀 was not really based on any particular hero or character in particular, but more taken from a broad representation of the sources. But then, I'm sorry if I'm belaboring the point, but I guess just what I'm trying to get to here is, take, for example, the Warrior of the Red Branch. You go through these level progressions, and they express the feats of Cuchulainn in a way that other game systems would not be able to. Because when you look into the source material, they describe the feats of Cuchulainn, and they give them names, almost like it's a martial arts movie or something. You know, he has the sundered flagstone, the spear feat, the cat feat. That's FEAT, not cat foot, but for the viewers. And I just wanted to display as much of these fine details as I possibly could. And just I guess the point I'm getting to is just the particular design of Dungeons and Dragons is what provided that structure. It permitted me to go into the finest amount of detail that I could, more than any other system would. I'm sorry if I belabored that point and took a little while there.
No, it's okay. No, that's very interesting. I wanted to ask then, what were some of the unique mechanical challenges in adapting this lore, this mythology, into the elements of D&D 5e?
Well, I'd say there weren't really any great challenges. I suppose just what I was trying to say with so many words there was just how the source material simply lent itself in such a natural way to the design that it just flowed together in a way that I couldn't really deny. It insisted upon itself, you might say. It came naturally in a sublime way that I honestly I miss writing it. Writing the book was perhaps the greatest part of the whole process, and I would just get so absorbed in it for days. It was kind of a sublime thing.
I can tell by reading it that it's the sort of thing that you can get lost in, and if you were writing the mythology, if you were just writing the mythology, you can still get lost in that. But to add in this extra layer of computation, which is how many points did I get for this? How many points do you need for this particular feat? And that's also quite impressive. So I'm looking at the book here, and I just like thinking to myself, was there any points where you were kind of going crazy? Because it's like you've added this whole level of complexity in by the scorecards and the hit points and all of those things as well. I've had difficulty working with mythology and teaching mythology. I found that it's easiest to approach it in the 4 different cycles, but they're 4 distinct different cycles that you mentioned in the book. But you found a way to like knit it all together in a very, very comprehensive way. But it's also extremely detailed. So I can only imagine, as I was reading, I was like, geez, this guy must have been going out of his mind a bit. But you said you did it during the COVID lockdown, which is, it's probably stopped you from going out of your mind if you were working on it this much. But yeah, I just like I can't tell you how impressed I am with the amount of detail you've gone into here. Like I'm looking at the page and it has the economy, right? And the stuff that you can buy, you have the 3 different units of currency. I think it's like Ungar, a shade, and a cool.
Yes.
Or a Kamal. And then you have like literally so many different items. And I was wondering if you could like tell us a little bit about how you imagine these items would work in the game. Because I've never played it before. I've never played Dungeons and Dragons. So I'm a bit of a neophyte when it comes to this. But is it just the case that like you start off with a certain amount of currency. You can use it to buy, I don't know, you have a flute, you have a dog, you have common horse, and then it goes on and on, like a set of fine clothing, a rich cloak, and I'm not even going into all of them here because there's so many of them, you know. And I'm wondering, like, how does this play out in the game itself?
Again, the idea with just adding in as much fine detail as I could was just the purpose of bringing ancient Ireland to life. And I suppose this is one way in which my archaeological perspective came through, where, you know, I'm very concerned with the idea of how the material artifacts and technology help bring a culture to life, help you understand that culture and the life ways of that culture. So the idea of just basically all the information that I cram into this book with these items and beyond is helping the reader become as familiar with the setting as possible. Just help them imaginatively invest in every single way. For instance, with these items, some of them will have what you'd call mechanical or game rules, you know, aspects to them, that, you know, some utility that the characters can use in combat or when they're exploring the wilderness. Others are not quite as useful. Others are just little baubles or trinkets or something that a player character might never really have occasion to use. But I included it all because one thing about Dungeons and Dragons players is they're going to ask these questions. They are going to test the boundaries. They are going to explore the world in novel and unconventional ways that might not be expected. So you have to anticipate the player and just about every possible action they might want to take. And so that calls for making the world of your game as interactable as possible. You know, giving them the descriptions and the functions of all of these items, it gives them something more tactile to grab onto for their characters to interact with, to have a more real relationship with this imaginary world.
Because it doesn't say it in the book, right? How how,
Mm.
how would I, like, is it necessary to buy food? Is it necessary to buy like a cloak or a cauldron you see here? Is it necessary to buy a whittled flute? Do you know what I mean? How does this, like, how does the mechanics actually play out in the game?
Well, first off, what's my camera looking like to you? I lost sight of my own face, so I don't know if I'm even on camera, if I'm showing you the book right now.
Well, I can see the book, yeah.
Okay, gotcha. I apologize. So, well, I guess what I wanted to express in all this is just, oh, for one who hasn't played D&D before, and I suspect that might be a fair portion of your audience who are also wondering what exactly the point of all of this would be at a gaming table. It differs from gaming group to gaming group, for one thing. The interests and the temperaments of the people sitting at the table. A lot of people will have perhaps no such interest in this, but then they might not have gone for Heroes of Tara in the first place. There are players who would just rather, you know, you might say, treat it like a video game, kick the door in, have their characters perform their abilities in combat, and, you know, score the points, win the day, and, you know, have a few beers at the table with their friends and go home. But then there is a fair section of the tabletop gaming community who is more concerned with having a collaborative storytelling experience with one another, where the narrative that organically arises from gameplay and the choices they make and the actions of their characters is the ultimate purpose. A lot of people also really enjoy what you might call as a simulation, where it's something in the middle, where it's not so much about the plot line and the story, it's not so much about the game mechanics and winning the combat, but it's about really just imaginatively immersing yourself in a cohesively constructed world and seeing how your character gets through it. So I guess, for instance, as like an example, let's just pick out a random item from the book here. let's just say that your characters are traveling in the wilderness and they have a small cooking pot. Here it provides them with a little bit of extra healing when they make camp for the night, because you're out adventuring, you're going to be losing hit points. Hit points are a fairly common concept that I'm sure even if somebody has not played Dungeons and Dragons, they've played video games. So a lot of video game language and design is directly taken from tabletop game design. So you have things like hit points, and after adventuring, you're going to be missing a few, and you usually restore your hit points at the end of a day during a rest overnight, making camp. And if you have one of these small cooking pots, it allows you to just heal a bit more. There are helmets that you can equip with your character, where if they suffer a particular grievous wound that would have otherwise slain them, the helmet can be sacrificed to spare the character from that consequence. So there are small utilities like that, and then there are other items in there that are just there for the flavor, for the sake of painting the picture, building a more complete world.
So how are you keeping track of all of this?
There is always when you're playing around a table with your friends, or more commonly nowadays when you're playing online through video chat, there are the players with their player characters, but then there is always going to be a player who is arranging, narrating, and mediating the plot line and the gameplay. They're usually referred to as dungeon masters or game masters. They're the ones who set the conflict before the characters of the other players. They're the ones who describe the stakes, who, just basically they're the storytellers. Everybody is a storyteller in their own way, especially even rather the players with their characters. But the game master is the primary storyteller who sets up the scenario. And they are also the ones who keep track of such things. Of course, as you're pointing out here now, I see you're bringing up the character sheet. That is where the player will put down all of their statistics that represent the abilities of their characters. Different classes will have different tendencies or abilities, where the hero of the Red Branch is more brawny, based on strength, can take a hit, where the 𝗵𝗵𝗄𝗃 has less hit points, not quite as durable, but has access to rules for casting spells and weaving magic. And they have other special class abilities that just help simulate the unique nature of each class and character.
Or how did you decide to include all of these different special events?
Well, one aspect of tabletop design in general, in particular Dungeons and Dragons game design, is there are what are called three pillars of gameplay. There is combat, which is the largest, primary, and most firmly established pillar in terms of design. And then you have the somewhat more neglected pillars of exploration and travel, as well as social interaction. And these are all, you might say, the three primary ways in which player characters will interact with the world. In many rule books, social interaction, along with wilderness travel and exploration, as I say, are a bit more underserved than combat. Combat almost usually gets the lion's share of attention in game design. And just as with everything else in this book, when the idea is that I want to simulate not only a cohesive setting, but also the life ways and culture of the people within that setting, these kind of provide a bit of you might say, a script or a template by which characters, or players rather, players can interact with that world a bit more meaningfully. They're special social interactions, where it's just the idea is giving players as much ways to interact with the world as possible. With the druids, you have so I should say druids, bards, and brehons. They are all characters that the player can take the role of. And so when you're playing a druid, it's not just about the ability to cast spells. It's not just about the perks that it brings in the pillar of combat. it should also be considered what's the social role of a druid. As obviously, I don't want to over exaggerate the involvement of 𝗵𝗵 in direct combat, but that's simply a consequence of the way Dungeons and Dragons is played. Because obviously in real history, you didn't have the poets and the seers going out on adventures right alongside with the warriors, but they still needed to be represented in combat. But then to compensate for that, they needed to have their actual social side displayed a bit more authentically as well. I just felt that I couldn't put out a book without giving due recognition to the actual roles that these sages played in actual society. So if you're playing a druid, you have a social responsibility to uphold, just like a Brehon or a 𝗵𝗵. And so you're taking part in ceremonies for the sake of the community. You are, resolving legal cases as a Brehon. And this is all as for the sake of non-player characters, or NPCs as they're called in shorthand. Again, those are all played by the game master, and it's all just. I don't. I'm sorry if I am repeating myself, but it's all just about the principle of simulation and immersion, and through as much detail as possible.
Yeah, I mean, you've definitely gone into a lot of detail here, and I'm kind of impressed that you have included these roles, and the way you explained it there was very kind of eye-opening. Because I noticed that you included Brehons, bards, and druids as like subclasses of the 𝗵𝗵, and you want to somehow incorporate like their nature into the game as well. And I like the way you have done that here with basically all three of them. And you also have this 𝗁𝗵𝗆𝗀. Could you talk to us a little bit about that, please?
So this is the social interaction that is available for the brawny warriors of the player group. For the warriors of the Red Branch, or the 𝗁𝗏, who are the more martially focused characters, where the 𝗵𝗵 is staying in back, casting their spells, working their ways. The 𝗁𝗏 and the Warrior of the Red Branch are up front and center in combat encounters in the gameplay, earning glory, committing great deeds. And after the battle is done, after the player characters say go to the nearest feasting hall, then this provides a chance for the players to have a bit of fun around the table, taking on the voice of their own character and in character boasting about the deeds of what they've done through the course of gameplay. And this is expressed in the from as well as I can understand, it is an actual historical or cultural practice that was back in the day. You can correct me if the veracity is off on that. But it was this custom of 𝗁𝗵𝗆𝗀, where at any royal feast, the choice portion, the champion's portion, which was normally the hindquarters and the loins of the roast boar, would be offered to the champion at the feast. And this would be determined through a boasting contest.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the players take part in this, I provided this whole mechanical rule set, just a procedure, you might say, by which to turn it into a game, make something fun out of it. You're keeping track of a score, and it's like a little mini game. And at the end, it is determined which player character, or perhaps a non-player character, wins that prize. And then the prize is not only expressed through the narrative terms and satisfaction, it is also expressed in mechanical terms, where your character gets a nice tidy little bonus, a little bit of a boost that will help them in their next adventure, perhaps.
Is there anything else in the pipeline?
It's probably going to be Heroes of Tara for quite a while now. I do not think that the Heroes of Tara publications are going to be limited to this one book. Typically in Dungeons and Dragons, you have this trinity of books. You have the player's guide, and then you have what's referred to as a monster manual, in which are listed with their own statistics and scores all the various creatures, monsters, beasts, and opponents or allies potentially that your player characters can encounter. And that's a bit of a toolbox that's given to the game master by which they can, offer a greater variety of opposition and foes to the player characters. And then after that, there is what's typically referred to as a game master's guide. In the case of Heroes of Tara, it's referred to as the Verse Master's Guide. And that's going to be a further expansion, you might say, of the rules, even more detail. That would contain such rules as, gosh, I've had a whole list in my head, but it's falling out right now. It would provide ways for player characters to build their own hill forts and manage that with actual scores that they keep. And it would just give even more detail. Those who are familiar with Dungeons and Dragons will know what I'm getting at when I talk about monster manuals and game master's guides. So that's going to be what comes around the pipe here. But it's going to be just the Heroes of Tara player's guide for a while. I am still new to the whole aspect of this as a business. I am primarily a creative first and foremost. But in today's world, I am also required to be a businessman as well as my own promoter. And it's all quite a lot to take in while in motion. I'm learning this all on the go. So I'm trying to take it slow, trying to not run before I can walk. So other books hopefully are on horizon, but it may be a while yet.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Is there anything that you wished I have anything that you wished I would have asked you in this interview that we didn't cover yet?
No, I'd say you covered it quite well there. I feel I've talked quite enough as well. I'm always happy to go on, but maybe I'm a bit self-conscious about talking too much. But if you've any other questions, I'm happy to provide.
How can people get a copy of this book, and how can they support your work?
Heroes of Tara can be found on drivethroughrpg.com. That's drivethrough THRU. I have my own little page set up there. As I said, it is currently available just through PDF, but it will also soon be put out in hardcover printed copies, and can be ordered print on demand. I also invite anybody who would like to come join us on our Discord server. We have a very small but growing community of wonderful people who are just as interested in Irish mythology and tabletop gaming, and the strange little overlap that we found between them. And it's really growing into something special.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to include those links in the description of this video. And I think that's a good place to wrap up the call. And I just want to thank you, Jacob, for your time and for talking about this very fascinating work. So yeah, thanks very much.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin. I appreciate your time.